I'm Khane Faygl Turtletaub, and you are watching Taped with Rabbi Doug.
We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug on your TV tonight. But Daddy, I want to watch Monday Night Football.
Forget about Monday Night Football. There's no other thing we're going to watch on Monday but Rabbi Doug.
Yeah, Rabbi Doug on TV tonight. We're going to see Rabbi Doug. Oh, everybody talk about Doug.
Shalom and welcome to Taped with Rabbi Doug. We are here in Chicago, Illinois. I am here with Dr. Khane Faygl Turtletaub.
That's it.
And yes, and I've known her for most of her life as Anita. She and I have been friends really since the 80s when the two of us were on a singles kosher cruise together for Pesach. And we've stayed friends ever since. But she's an amazing woman, and that's why I wanted to have her on the show. First of all, she may not say this, but I will tell all of you, she is one of maybe a couple or the most prominent Yiddish scholar in the Chicago area, and not only a scholar in knowing Yiddish, but being able to translate and decipher Yiddish that hasn't been used for generations. She's a writer, lecturer, teacher. Her articles on Yiddish language, Judaism, and relationships have appeared in many national and local magazines and newspapers. She's had 5 short stories published in Yiddish, one which was a feature story. Dr. Turtletaub has also run successful nationwide singles weekends all over the country, including here in Chicago. She's been on the faculty of the Dawn Schumann Institute, the Hebrew Theological College, Oakton College, Truman College, Northwestern University, Harold Washington College, Spertus College of Judaica, Spertus University, and she has lectured in many synagogues and Jewish organizations over the years. She's appeared on Friends, she's appeared on the Milt Rosenberg radio show, and now she's appearing on Taped with Rabbi Doug. She's a co-author of a musical comedy, Love in the Catskills. She has some incredible books, Yiddish Songs for Children, which she has published, which also comes with a CD inside, and these have been performed by which Philharmonic? Members of Israel Philharmonic have performed this. She has an incredible book that she has translated, which is the stories of Hans Christian Andersen, and she's edited and translated it completely into Yiddish. It is just an amazing thing, this famous work, which she has done and she's well known for. She's really someone who, if you are Jewish, you'd want to know. If you have any interest in Yiddish or European history, you'd want to know. And certainly, if you're a viewer of Taped with Rabbi Doug, you want to know Dr. Turtletaub. I have here a copy of one of your articles that you've written. This is in the Jewish Forward. This is the most prominent Yiddish newspaper still in existence today in the United States, and the Forward. And it's not just in the United States, it's also in Israel and other places where it is distributed. But she writes regularly an article in Yiddish, and this one is the matchmaker is looking for a match also. So this is she is single at the moment, and if you're a fine mensch, and you'll drop us an email at info@tvrabbi.com and I'll make an introduction. Welcome to the show.
Oh, so nice to be here.
You know, here your sister and brother-in-law were members of my congregation for many years as well, so I know a lot of your family members. I'm so intrigued by how your family, including your sister, are so prominently comfortable speaking Yiddish. And it's really an amazing thing. And you just gone beyond speaking Yiddish to translating Yiddish to doing things in Yiddish that other people haven't done. Of course, the other person who I consider to be the other Yiddish scholar in Chicago is Rabbi Dr. Stanford, who lives in the self-help home in Chicago. And he's up in his years, but he was my teacher and an incredible Yiddish scholar, and I always considered you two to be equal in that way. Tell me, how did you get not only your love for Yiddish, I know, did you learn Yiddish as a first language? Did you grow up in a home where your mother and father spoke Yiddish to you as a baby and grew up with Yiddish before you spoke English?
Actually, I did speak Yiddish before I spoke English because my parents spoke Yiddish to me.
Were they born in Europe, your parents?
Yes.
They were.
Yeah, I was born in Europe.
You were born in Europe also.
Yeah.
So where were you born?
In Kazakhstan, in Russia.
Uh-huh.
And I came as like a very tiny infant, you know. And my love for Yiddish grew because people heard us speak Yiddish, and they wondered why a young person was speaking Yiddish. Well, it was the only language my parents understood for a very long time, and I wound up getting a great education and a doctorate in 18th century aesthetics, the interconnection of poetry and art in the early 18th century London. And after I got my doctorate and started teaching English, I quickly became bored with that and found my fascination for Yiddish growing, even academically. And I started writing Yiddish and lecturing in Yiddish, and that overtook any English background that I had.
How did you learn your proficiency in grammar in Yiddish and all those things that a writer has to learn when you really didn't go to school for Yiddish to learn it? You learned it at home growing up. How did you study and learn these things that you had to learn to become so proficient?
Well, I was teaching English at Cuyahoga Community College in Cleveland, and I got a sabbatical after teaching there for 7 years. I went to New York and enrolled in Columbia University's language school, and there I met the Yiddishists that were prominent at the time and learned the grammar. But once you know one language, the second language comes much more easily. And I started teaching classes. And if I didn't know something, I would say, well, that's a wonderful question, but that's a few chapters away. And I would scurry home and learn it.
Very good, very good. So I just want to talk about Yiddish here in Chicago with my growing up. Now, in the 50s, in the 60s, and in the early 70s, there were Yiddish schools here in the Chicago area. People didn't necessarily go to Hebrew school. A lot of people went to Yiddish school, especially the girls. And this was their Jewish education and their Yiddish education. But those schools slowly closed down until the last one sold their building to the Chicago Community Kollel, and that was it for Yiddish schools in Chicago. And really the only Yiddish learning that continued to go on in Chicago and maybe around the country are the Hasidic day schools that taught in Yiddish and still do today. And those children learn Yiddish in school from the time that they're young. But the question is, will it carry on to the next generation? So tell me
It's
your
not even carrying on
that.
through this generation. The only Yiddish-speaking instruction is in the Weizsäcker Cheder. Even Cheder Lubavitch no longer teaches Yiddish as the language of instruction. They have a Yiddish class, and that's because the parents of the children going to Cheder Lubavitch don't speak Yiddish. And for a while they thought of having me teach classes to the parents, but parents with several children, 5, 6 children, are busy enough, and that didn't work out. And even the teachers now at Cheder Lubavitch don't speak Yiddish well enough, so that kind of fell by the wayside, and the young people are not speaking Yiddish. But with my book, I know people love it. It's a wonderful gift, and children learn Yiddish kind of while they're dancing around. It goes through their head. And
you wrote all the music in that book by yourself.
I wrote the music as well. Even though I wasn't musical at the time, I had an innate sense of music, but I had 4 children under 3. And that was so hard, and I used to have to pile them into the car, even to get a bottle of milk. And I would start to entertain them with the songs I sang. Oh, look, there's a lamppost, and look, there's something else. And when I sing the songs, they would be quiet and listen, which was very nice because my voice is not the greatest. And when I got home and they would be playing while I was cooking or washing dishes, I would listen to hear what songs they remembered. And the songs they remembered were the winners. The one about the turtle crossing the street never made it into my book because they couldn't say the word chagapacha. They say cha-cha-cha-cha. And so that we scratched that one. But the other ones there are Sesame Street-like songs, and they're uptune, And I sent them to one of the Cheders, as a matter of fact, and they said, no, this is not for us. The songs are too lively. And I said, well, B'nai Shalom, what do they want, dirges? But kids love my songs, even if they don't understand it.
So cool. So one of the things that you do besides your employment jobs is you go out and you do lectures for different organizations and different communities. You share history of Yiddish, about the language itself, about Jewish wives' tales, as they say, Baba Maisis, Yiddish stories. You tell stories in Yiddish, you're a storyteller. You speak about famous Yiddish writers such as Shalom Aleichem and Peretz, and so many others. You talk about Yiddish theater. The most famous, probably, actress Molly Pecan, is something that someone you lecture about famous comedians who spoke Yiddish, such as Jackie Mason. Just so many different things. You even talk about George Burns and Milton Berle and Woody Allen and so on, and Yiddish music. There's so many things. I'm a singer. You are so worldly in your knowledge about everything. Here, when I knew you years ago, Anita Abraham, now you're Dr. Turtletaub, and you're this famous Yiddish scholar. Tell me, what really haven't you done in the world of Yiddish that you're looking towards doing in the future? Because I know this is your passion.
Well, there are two things. One thing is those articles that I wrote for the Horovitz. They're very, very funny, and people really love them. And I'd like to put those in a book, in an illustrated book.
Oh,
and so I'd like to find a sponsor for that. And that would be, I think, very, very fun. And the other thing that someone suggested that I do is become a newscaster. I think I'd be better at the weather report in Yiddish.
So let's say, I just want to, for our viewers, let's say today it's going to be 35 degrees outside, Fahrenheit, and the weather's going to be partly cloudy, partly sunny, and people should dress warm. Can we do that for a little weather report quickly in Yiddish?
Heint wird sein 35 Grad in Dresden, den ganzen Tag. Es wird sein sonnig und ein bisschen kiel. Tut sich und das Wetter, ihr sollt können euch tun, wenn ein Windel bläst.
Actually, I understood part of that. That's great. That's great. I love it. I love it. Tell me, when we look at things in Yiddish, there are a lot of Yiddish things and a lot of Yiddish movies that became famous over the years, such as the Dybbuk. The Dybbuk is the one that I remember as maybe a teenager or maybe in my 20s when I saw it the first time and stuff. Based on something like The Exorcist, almost in a Yiddish, Jewish sort of theme.
Kale, as men los da kala lein tar der Chippe, kimen beiser iches und trugen sie ave.
These movies, do you talk about these movies to people? Do you lecture about Jewish and Yiddish movies that have been famous over the years, and Yiddish plays and Yiddish stories that have become famous back in the days of Yiddish theater?
I talk about pretty much everything related to Judaism. The history of the language, where it's going, who speaks it, movies done in Yiddish. But I must say, now that I have this opportunity, that Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish is very, very popular now, wildly popular. Popular beyond anybody's wildest dreams, and it's been extended and extended in New York, and now it's extended once more, even though the theater that they're at now has been booked for something else. But the star of that show, Steve Skybell, or Abba Shaya, as I know him, was my student, and I taught him Yiddish. And I am supremely proud of that, as if he were a child of mine, and I see him blossoming. He's just done a wonderful job.
So here in Chicago, there are a couple of bands, but probably the most prominent that does a lot of Yiddish music is the Maxwell Street Klezmer Band. And Lori is a good friend, and Lori loves Yiddish music like she loves any music, as much or better than any other music that she does. What do you think about the popularity of Yiddish music? People love to hear it. How many people know Tumbala, Tumbala? Everybody knows that in Jewish circles. what do you think about the popularity of Yiddish music still today, even though people don't speak Yiddish?
Well, it's very lively. It's very lively, and people like to dance. And most weddings, there's a horror. They just dance around in circles because it's always so crowded. And this kind of music lends itself to anything you want to do. It's lively, it sets off the neshama, and just makes you happy whenever you hear it. Not that there aren't love songs in Yiddish, and sad songs in Yiddish as well. And Shein wie die Levona is very, very popular as a love song. I know that if someone were to sing me a love song, I would like it to be in Yiddish.
And my Yiddish mama in Yiddish and in English are both very popular. Both very popular. I want to go back just for a few moments to Hans Christian Andersen's stories in Yiddish. How do you choose, or who approached you and said, let's translate Hans Christian Andersen rather than let's translate, some other famous author that we know from the ages?
Well, that's a very interesting story. I was at a Yiddish gathering of YIVO, the Yiddish Wissenschaft Institute here in Chicago, and they asked one elderly gentleman to stand up because he had donated quite a bit of money to Yiddish. And he came over to me later and said, we have to talk. I have stuff for you to translate. And I said, yeah, very nice. Give me your address. And I figured nothing would happen. Well, I came and he said, wait a minute, I have to get this. And he brings out boxes and dust. Dust was coming from these boxes. And I'm going, what is this? And he said, these are my father's writings. He was over 80 at the time. And I said, these have been in your basement. He says, yeah. I said, how long? He says, 40 years. I need a gas mask. And there were stories that he had translated. The man just loved Yiddish, and he had a Danish dictionary, and he was translating stories. When I got those pages that this man wanted me to look over, they were brown, the edges were crumbling, they were held together by a rusted straight pin, and I could hardly make out the words. So I am not the first translator, but I basically had to retranslate the whole thing, and I had to get 3 different versions in English because I had to find out, what was he saying? Was it a beech tree or a birch tree? And I had to compare the 3 versions. If 2 of them agreed it was a beech tree, then it was a beech tree. So, and I took out a lot of the, because Hans Christian Andersen was a devout Christian, I took out a lot of the Christian references, and of course it's not a Jewish book, but I made it so that it was acceptable to Jewish children, and I worked really for at least 10 years on those translations.
Wow. So what made you want to write, because we only have a couple of minutes left, Yiddish songs for children? It's so beautiful. The songs are beautiful, and as you said, the members of the Israel Philharmonic have played these songs, and they're catchy. What made you want to write this instead of a children's storybook, for example?
I told you, because I would sing these songs to my children in the car.
And you just wanted to take what your children loved and put it into
my children were typical children, and I sang, so I made them up as I went along, as I was driving. I didn't write music, I didn't have a musical background, and as I was driving, they would listen, and I kept making up verses, and when we got home, the ones they remembered were the winners. And these are the stories that I wrote for my children. Because I wrote them for my children, and they loved them, I kept singing them to my children, and everybody would listen to me. Finally, I made a match, because I'm also a matchmaker, of a very prominent couple in...
and your name's not even Yenta. Okay, go ahead. No. Yenta the matchmaker.
So, a prominent couple, and they just didn't know what to do for me. They were so happy, and they're still happily married. And finally, I asked her, I said, how would you like to sponsor this book? Because a book costs a lot of money.
Sure it does.
And she said, well, not right now. And I said, well, I tried. Several years later, she said, now I'm ready. And she sponsored this book.
Oh, that's so nice.
And someone came over to her later, and she said, and they said, this is one of the best things you've ever done for the Jews in Chicago and in the world.
Wow. I can't tell you how happy I am to have you, not just as my friend, but as such a prominent member of the community and such an amazing Jewish scholar. on my show with me today. Thank you so much for being here. I just want to kind of ask you, what's your next project?
My next project is I want to put the stories that I've written for the Forwards.
The Forwards, that book that you talked about.
Right.
So that's your next project.
Right, called The Matchmaker Also Wants to Get Married. Although I stopped writing about the Michiganers I've been dating, and I started writing stories about my life. Every day in my life brings something wonderful, like this, like being on your show.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I want to thank you for being on the show. Dr. Khane Faygl Turtletaub, as fondly as I know her as Anita for all these years, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. Remember, you can check out our website, www.tvrabbi.com. You can also see former shows on the web. If you want to email my guest, you can email us at info@tvrabbi.com, and I will forward it to her, and I know she'll get back to you personally, or if you want to email me, you can email me at that address. I want you to stay with us every week here on Taped with Rabbi Doug. Next, coming up with me is David Horovitz. He is the editor of the Times of Israel newspaper. He's a former editor of the Jerusalem Post and other newspapers as well. So you don't want to leave. Stay with us, and hope to see you next time as well on Taped with Rabbi Doug. Shalom, everyone.
Hi everybody, I'm David Horovitz, the editor of the Times of Israel, and you're watching Taped with Rabbi Doug.
Shalom and welcome to Taped with Rabbi Doug. We're here in Chicago, Illinois, and I'm here with the founding editor of the Times of Israel, David Horovitz. Welcome to Chicago. Shalom Aleichem and Baruch haba. We're just here briefly, and he's spoken to a number of Israeli supporters here in Chicago, and you're really an expert on the Israel-American relationship and a political analyst of Israel. Tell me right now, as we look at what's going on in Israel, what do you think is the most dangerous thing, which you didn't speak about tonight? What is the most dangerous thing going on right now? Is it still Iran? Is it Hezbollah? Is it what right now is the dangerous thing? Because we know a lot of good things are going on in Israel right now.
Okay, so I think there are three areas where we should be concerned. We should be concerned about internal divisions in Israel. Our President Rabin, thinks that that's actually the thing that worries him most, that we're too intolerant of each other, and that we are, disinclined to hear contradictory opinions, and we need to sort of enjoy more nuanced debate. Jews in Israel, because we're the majority, tend to be nastier to Jews than people are than anywhere else in the world. Mm-hmm. And if non-Jews spoke to Jews the way some Jews speak to Jews in Israel, people would find it unacceptable. So there's the raucousness and the danger of extremism. Then there's the Israel diaspora issue, which I don't think it's an existential threat, but I think we need to improve that dialogue. Mm-hmm. I don't think the two Jewish worlds, if you like, understand each other well enough. They have different imperatives, they have different priorities, but there's the gulf between them in a time when it's very easy to communicate is wider than it should be. And I actually think we lack a forum. I think there needs to be some kind of ongoing, formal area where people get together and talk through the issues that are of concern for them both and work out how differing needs can be reconciled. But then you're really asking me most of all about the sort of the military threats. We survived conventional warfare, 48, 56, 67, 73. We don't see an imminent threat of conventional warfare. We survived terrorism, which people take for granted. That in the Second Intifada, 3 years, where every day you knew people were trying to kill you, and about once every week or two something was blowing up. It's amazing that Israel held together. We take it for granted, but we shouldn't. That Israelis decided, no, we're not going to be terrorized into fleeing the country, and that was the idea. The goal was a strategic onslaught of terrorism to try and destroy us, and we survived that. We found the resilience to survive that, and now we face these sort of well-armed army-style terrorist organizations. Hamas and especially Hezbollah, 150,000 rockets and missiles, all pointing at Israel, combined with the effort to delegitimize us. I think that it's the combination that makes that a really pernicious threat. Because, for example, Hamas, there is no territorial dispute theoretically between Israel and Gaza. There's no Israeli military presence in Gaza. There's no civilian presence in Gaza. So why is Hamas firing rockets and rallying at the border violently, rioting at the border? Because they have no tolerance for Israel in any dimension. And then to the north you have Hezbollah with all of that, with an incredibly potent missile strength. We sustained a 50-day war against Hamas 4 years ago. We would not be able to sustain 50 days of being attacked by Hezbollah, and therefore, if they decide, and if Iran decides that the moment has come, we will have to cause considerable damage in Lebanon in order to prevent our country being heavily damaged, to put it mildly. So I don't think that there is an imminent existential military threat, but I think there are concerns, and they all relate to Iran in a way. Hamas is not directly controlled by Iran, but it's certainly, there's more common ground. Islamic Jihad in Gaza is Hamas controlled, is Iran controlled. Hezbollah in South Lebanon is largely Iranian controlled. And then there's Iran, which will go for the bomb the moment they think that they can. And therefore, we're very strong, and we're incredibly resilient. But I think it is complacent and unjustifiable to say, there's no military threats to Israel. They change all the time. The region is unpredictable. But we do not have the luxury in Israel. In America, you ask, this is something I did say just now in my speech, you ask 50 Americans, will the country still be here 50 years from now? The question's ridiculous. They would say, why, of course, it's just a silly question. Ask 50 Israelis, they would say, we better had be, and we'll do our utmost to make sure we are. But can we be certain? The region doesn't allow us to be as certain as we'd like to be. Unfortunately, we always have to be on our guard.
Mm-hmm. So just one more question that I want to ask you, and that's looking at the positive side of things now. What is, the Netanyahu government seems to survive every time. It seems like it's going to possibly, elections might be that the coalition's going to fall apart. It all of a sudden pulls back together. President Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu is such a extremely incredible speaker, and he's able to woo the people and calm them in some ways when they're worried, and sometimes maybe the only questions are, how do we react to this rocket or to this terrorism? But really, things are overall, he's an amazing man. What is really positive now going on in Israel that makes Israel the resilient country that it is today? What's the positive thing that's making it so?
There's lots, right? So this is a short conversation we're having.
Yes, short conversation.
But we could speak. This it's an incredible country. The biggest, most positive thing that I would say as a father of 3 Israeli kids is the people that we produce in Israel are phenomenal people, capable and smart and self-sufficient and innovative and creative and patriotic and wise. I mean, my kids and their peers are wonderful people, and they're pioneering people. Israel, you hear this all the time, but it's true. Computer surgery and water, good use of water, and all kinds of tech advances and biomedical advances and nanotechnology and a million things, right? So that we're doing incredible things. It is an astoundingly resilient country, born of necessity. But it's a country, it's not just surviving, it's thriving and flourishing. And there's this annual UN happiness survey. Israel is, according to the definition of its own people, Israel is the 11th happiest country in the world.
Amazing.
I mean, that's just not
and
possible.
The US is 18th, you said?
The US is 18th, right? We have, you know who the neighbors are. There's a confidence, there's a determination to thrive. And, it plays out in all kinds of extraordinary and positive ways. But that survey is a pretty good summation. We're the only people happier than we are the blooming Scandinavians, right? How is that possible? It says a great deal about Israel.
That's great. I want to thank you so much for being on the show and talking with me today. David Horovitz, he is the founding editor of Times of Israel, and he's been with every other Jewish publication and stuff writing too. He's amazing. And stay with us here on Taped with Rabbi.
This has been a Taped with Rabbi Doug production.